Welcome back, baseball fans, to the 1979-82 Fall League off-season look. This is the fourth part here. We're going to look at the last 8 teams as they try and get to the proper number of players on their current active roster. 4 guys they want to keep, 2 they want to put on waivers, and 2 they want to retire. We've gone through in groups of 8 and then up to 16 halfway through. Last time we got from 17 to 24. I got all the way done from teams 25 to 32 through a series of moves. And so we'll take a look at the latest transactions that occurred. And there are some interesting and kind of fun moves for the timeline. We'll take a look at the carousel. This is where we left off last time. And the next team up is California and Portland, both in the playoff field. And this is an interesting trade. Portland trades Dave Frost, who only threw 78 innings in 78. Trades him back to the team he played for, the Angels, because the Angels won his 79 season, where he'll pitch on 3 days rest, for Paul Hartzell, who will be put on waivers. Now, Portland gets a token for this move, as they Angels get a nice, valuable player. And you remember the Angels were in the League Championship Series, so they're going to try and run this thing back next year with Nolan Ryan in his final year of 79 and Dave Frost at the top of that rotation. Let's take a look at the rosters, the fixed rosters, which you can also see. This is where we had 151 keepers, 59 waives, and 46 retires. Well, we actually have the correct math now. So let's take a look at the Angels and see what they're doing with their pitching. Remember, they didn't keep Tanana. They put him on waivers. And there's Tanana on waivers. So they're going to have Ryan and Frost. Baumgarten's still there. And they traded for John Curtis a little bit later in the draft, a left-handed starter. So they're going to go with 2 righties and 2 lefties in the rotation. They have Ralston in the bullpen, so they don't need Tanana anymore. Let's take a look at some more trades after that one. Here's a nice little trade. So this trade involved an active player that's on a roster, which is in a green, and a retired player. So it didn't change any of the math of the keep. It didn't change any of this math up here of keepers, waives, retires. It was just a trade done to make most squads better. And particularly, the Pirates, they wanted Tim Foley as their shortstop because they struggled at that position a year ago. And Foley helps the Pirates, 288 hitter in 79. Good little shortstop, and the Pirates win the World Series with him there. They're willing to let go of Sparky Lyle, who's getting very old, but he still has like 1 or 2 good years left. The Expos end up getting Lyle and Foley. And then these other guys, Davalillo and Schultz, retiring players, just represent a hitter and a pitcher to balance the trade for the roster. So that's what Pittsburgh did as they were on the clock. When we look back here for a moment, we see that it was Cleveland, Portland, and Pittsburgh. So let's see if Pittsburgh does anything else while we have this. We don't. So the next big move, Vegas and Baltimore. This is going to be a fun series of trades here. Kansas City and Atlanta don't do anything. They pass. And Baltimore, California, and the Dodgers. Baltimore and California make some moves, maybe not the Dodgers. But this is the first move between Vegas and Baltimore. Notice there was no balancing tokens in that trade here, because I thought Lyle and Foley each played a role. Starting shortstop and a lefty reliever. That may not be a closer. This is similar in that same thing. Baltimore is given the rights to Doug DeCinces away, plus an aging Joe Rudy, for a .318 hitting Al Bumbry and a retired Joe Wallace. And I kind of look at Bumbry and DeCinces equating each other, plus their careers last till maybe 1984, 1985. And Wallace and Rudy are older players. And if anything, Vegas should have given Baltimore a token, which I thought was completely unfair, since Baltimore is a regular playoff participant and Vegas is an expansion team. So I left it alone, no tokens. And Bumbry had left Baltimore for about 8 years, and now he's back. He was taken in the expansion draft by Vegas, if you're wondering. So each traditional major league team lost a star to these expansion teams, and Baltimore's biggest star was their leadoff hitter Al Bunbury. Now he's back, but the Sensace is gone. Then another really cool trade between Vegas and California. So Vegas, after acquiring the Sensace, they package him up with the active Bill Almon, a 301 hitting shortstop in '81, to California for Carney Lansford, an active player, and the rights to Freddie Patek. So we have the same number of active players and keepers. And the reason this is a no token deal here is Angels are getting they're getting a 300 hitter in Almon and a 30 home run hitting Doug DeCinces in '82. Vegas is getting a 336 hitting Carney Lansford in '81, and Patek is only a stopgap shortstop for a year. But the reason there's no tokens involved, you'd think that the Angels are getting the best of this deal immediately, 2 300 hitters for 1 300 hitter. But the reality is Almon will be done after '81. That's his only good year. DeCinces gets some more injuries. He's done by the middle of the decade. Carney Lansford will play on and on and on throughout the 1980s into 1990. So that's why Vegas wants Lansford for, the rest of the decade, you could say. So that's why there was no tokens involved in this trade. All the trades are done knowing what the future looks like because we have baseball history. So that's why I change the trades that may have been imbalanced in the past. I know it's going to happen because it's all documented. So, all right, Vegas is still making moves. They got rid of Wayne Nordhagen, keeper, who interestingly has a couple years hitting close to 300, I think 78 and 81. Onoveris always hit for a decent batting average as a switch hitter, no glove third baseman. They sent both of those guys to the Cubs for Buck Martinez. It was a really nice year in '79. It's probably his best offensive year. Crushes left-handed pitching and has a good throwing arm. Could be an everyday catcher. And in Enos Cabell, it's going to go on waivers. So this is where Vegas, they collect a token because they're only really getting one player and giving up two. So Vegas collects a token here. Let's take a pause and look and see what Vegas now looks like after all these moves. We'll go look and see where they started. They started with a bunch of guys. Vegas started with 6 guys they wanted to keep. Chris Chambliss, Wayne Nordhagen, John Denny, Mike Torres, Kevin Cobell, Bill Castro. Well, in the short, they're keeping Chambliss. They traded Nordhagen, you saw. They're hanging on to Denny because Denny's got some really nice years in the early 1980s with Philadelphia and Cleveland. Torres, they didn't have a suitor for him, so they end up putting him on waivers, and they traded Cobell to the Mets. So what does that mean when you look at Vegas now, after all these moves? Well, they got Carney Lansford playing third base now. They don't have Bill Almon playing short anymore, but they still got Roger Metzger there if they need that. And they have Freddie Patek. So Metzger's a switch hitter, Patek's a right-hander, so that covers shortstop and third base. Champs is coming back to play first. They still got Randolph at second. Cabell goes on waivers. He's sort of in a lull. He does well in 1983, but it's outside the timeline. And they value John Denny more than the other pitchers they had, Dave Frost, Mike Torres, etc. And they still have John Tudor. And Bill Castro is a nice little relief pitcher moving forward, too. Portland, the other expansion team, holds on to Art Howell, Chet Lemon, Tom Verizor, and Randy Lerch. Randy Lerch has a 1979 where he can pitch on 3 days rest. That's why they held on to him. Let's go back to the carousel and see where we are now. The Cardinals have been quiet because they didn't have a particularly great group of keepers, and most of them were other teams' players anyway. Let's look at the opening round for the Cardinals. And you'll see that it's not really crazy. They got a Cesar Geronimo who wasn't theirs. Elliot Maddox wasn't theirs. Jerry Martin, that wasn't theirs. Silvio Martinez was, and they're going to keep him because he's got a really nice 79. And Aurelio Lopez was, but he'd find greater success for the Tigers. So there was going to be a lot of movement with the Cardinals. And when all is said and done, they're going to keep Geronimo because he's got a nice 1982 in center field. Jerry Martin's got a nice 1979, and that's 2 outfielders, Silvio Martinez, and they went and got Al Roboski, bring him back from the Pirates in a deal. And in losing Oh, they also got Mark Littell from the Tigers in this trade. They sent Aurelio Lopez and an active Bernie Carbo. His 1979 year. It's kind of a one-way player. Homers, walks, and strikeouts on his card. For Mark Littell, who was a Kansas City closer in the late 70s, had one good year with St. Louis, and put on waivers Bobby Valentine. Because Aurelio Lopez outlasts these other three guys, this is a good value player. St. Louis gets a token, and Detroit's got to fork one up so that the Tigers can fortify their bullpen. All right, we said before, here is the Pirates sending Hrabowski to the Cardinals for a retired player. Because it was a retired player, the Pirates demanded a token for that. And given the Cardinals a key setup guy, is not something you'd like to do to a division rival, but the Pirates looked at it as like the lowly Cardinals, and we get a token, so they did that. In a similar move, which is interesting, the Yankees sent a starting shortstop as a keeper to the Expos for a retired player, but no tokens were given in this move because the value of this player is very low. McKelleher, he's a 254 hitting shortstop, so as the best player in this trade, it isn't really worth considering a token. All right, Portland's making another move. They would send Charlie Huff to Atlanta for Don Robinson. What's really interesting is that Don Robinson was a starting pitcher, and he's going to turn into a reliever. And Charlie Huff was a relief pitcher, and he's going to turn into a starter. Atlanta's going to have Charlie Huff and Phil Niekro, two knuckleball pitchers in the bullpen. And you notice that the Portland gets a token, and you notice these expansion teams like to collect tokens. We saw Vegas get one over there, and we saw Portland get one over there. That's what they do when they've got other people's talent, and those teams call and want their players back. All right, this is an interesting move. The Pirates, Junior Kennedy was a shortstop last year, and he did a pretty good job, but he's just not it was just a one-year plug. And they needed a situational lefty in the pen, and Alchenko has one nice year in '81, and the Pirates want that from the Reds, and they give Junior Kennedy back to his original team, which was the Cincinnati Reds. Reds collect a token in that deal, which is not a big deal for Pittsburgh, since Pittsburgh got a token in that deal. So Pittsburgh nets 0 here. All right, California. They needed another lefty after not holding on to Frank Tanana. So they found that John Curtis has a couple years left in '79 and '80, and Jim Barr, actually these guys were both San Francisco Giant pitchers, if you recall. But a lefty is more valuable than a righty, and so the Angels got Curtis to take Tanana's spot on the team. Boston will get a token for that, since Jim Barr is very low value. In a trade of fair... the Reds traded a capable closer who will probably be a setup man on the Mets because the Mets have Jeff Reardon, Doug Bear, to get Fred Norman back on Cincinnati, as Fred Norman bailed in the Reds earlier in the carryover league, and now he's back in his final year of '79 or '80. This is pretty much a fair trade because these guys don't have a lot of time left, either one of them. This was just a trade of a team who had too many lefties and a team who had too many righties in the outfield. So Texas trades Roland Office, a 2 center fielder who can only play one way, to Minnesota for a 2 left fielder who actually can play both ways, but is limited otherwise, so no token involved. Here's a nice trade here where Del Unser, if you notice Minnesota, they unloaded, or they acquired Roland Office, which means they had to unload Del Unser, who was a corner outfielder. And they needed a lefty reliever to replace Jim Cott, and they got Jerry Augustine. So Duffy and Cott were retired players balancing position. Pitcher, hitter, right there. And this is another just a balancing the books kind of trade. The most common trade that happens is a retired player for a waived player. Nobody gets an advantage. It's just that two teams are balancing the books. California needed a waived guy, and Minnesota needed a retired guy, and so the teams obliged sending a shortstop for an outfielder. Here's a cool little trade. So, Seattle had too many starting pitchers. Let's take a look at them for a moment. They've got really interesting change in the pitching staff, and it's pretty good for the Mariners. They had Floyd Bannister, Mike Parrott's around for one more year, and they got the last good year for Gaylord Perry at age 40 and 79. So that's 3 starters. And plus they had Paul Splittorff, they got out of Kansas City, and Glenn Abbott. So they had 5 starters. And the Mets had an abundance of relievers. So the 2 teams met, and a starting pitcher, Glenn Abbott, was traded for a relief pitcher, Pat Zachary. Funny thing is, Abbott's a starter 6, Zachary is a starter 5, relief 3, but Zachary's mostly used in relief, and Abbott can't pitch in relief. But the Mets are going to make Abbott their number 3 starter, behind Craig Swan and Kevin Cabell, and Pat Zachary will go into the Seattle bullpen since they don't need him to start. Here's a big trade for the Yankees. So, Harry Spillman used to play for Houston, so this does make some sense. The Yankees had Harry Spillman as a left-handed hitting, kind of a pinch hit DH, guy who could play catcher, third, and first. But on the Yankees, if you recall, they got Greg Nettles at third, and they got Jim Spencer at first, so they don't really need a Harry Spillman. They do like a left-handed hitting catcher to platoon with Munson, and they went out and got the .328 hitting Dave Rader of 1980. So because the batting average was so different between these 2 guys, even though actually Spillman's career will go on longer than Radar, but his value of a .328 hitter, that's a token. So the Yankees have to fork up a token to get a .328 hitting catcher. This sort of seems like why, the Yankees would be a spending team that would do, kind of cheat the system, if you want to call it that. Because I don't have free agency, and so I make them spend as many tokens as possible in this carousel when they can. Here's a fun trade. Seattle. So Al Oliver, if you recall, was a Pirate. Once he left Pittsburgh, he went to Texas. So in the carryover league a year ago, or 2 years ago, the trade, Oliver ended up going to Seattle instead of Texas, a division rival. So Seattle was not going to send Oliver to their division rival, the Rangers. They waited until 1982 because Al Oliver gets traded to the Expos in '82, and he plays first base, and he wins the batting title. So they're willing to trade out of their division for a Tony Perez, and both guys are first basemen. The funny thing is, both are 4s defensively. Tony Perez is a 4 at first, Al Oliver is a 4 at first. One's lefty, one's righty. Oddly enough, Perez is in the Hall of Fame. Oliver probably should be. But in any event, Seattle gets the token because, Al Oliver wins a batting title, and Tony Perez is getting very old and less effective at this point. Another trade where the Yankees had to fork up a token for kind of a questionable guy. Dave Ford and Bill Caldwell are both, Dave Ford is relief 4, starter 5, and Bill Caldwell is starter 5, relief 3, which is pretty much the same thing. Neither guy both guys, if they start, will break in the 5th inning. But the Yankees, because they have a loaded bullpen, they needed a right-handed starter. And let's go look at the Yankees for a second. One of the problems that the Yankees have in the carryover league is that they can't do what they want to do and have 3 or 4 left-handed starting pitchers on the team. They have John and Guidry, and they have Dave Righetti, who's actually a starting pitcher, but they put him in the bullpen. But if they couldn't get another lefty, as a matter of fact, Rick Waits, they're putting on waivers, because you're only allowed to have 3 lefties on a team. But the Yankees, if you look at their history, they really didn't have right-handed starting pitchers from 1979 to 82. They had Gaylord Perry for a few minutes. They had Catfish Hunter in the late 70s. They had Mike Torres, but they really didn't have anybody pitching right-handed. They had a bunch of lefties, Joe Cali and Tom Underwood and some other guys. So they got Bill Caldwell because as a starter 5, it allows them to use this great bullpen of Terry Leach, Dick Tidrow, Dave Righetti, and Rich Gossage. So they don't mind Bill Caldwell being a starter 5 pitcher. So that's why that trade happened. And the Yankees, because Dave Ford, this pitcher is largely, he's got like a 4.28 ERA. Portland gets a token from the Yankees, and the Yankees have to spend more money. Here is the final transaction, and this is kind of funny in its own way. Baltimore and Toronto needed to swap a waived guy for a retired guy. So Baltimore put Larry Heisel in waivers since his last good year was 78, though he does have a year in 79, where he only hits right-handed pitching but not left-handed pitching. So as a waived player, they traded him to a division rival for a retired Larry Cox. However, Toronto decided, you know what? We want to make Larry Heisel a keeper. And let's take a look at Toronto. And the reason is that they have Leon Roberts, but Heisel against right-handed pitching in 1979 is better than any of the future Leon Roberts cards. So that was a move to actually get a late-blooming keeper at a Larry Heisel. His final year in 1979, where he only hits right-handed pitching. It's like 281 with an 800 OPS. So Heisel, Roy Howell is a Blue Jay. Jeff Zahn's a nice lefty to thread between Steve, Alexander, and Clancy in the bullpen. And Brian Hasselstein is a platoon center fielder. It's 284, which is not bad for a Toronto team. When all is said and done, let's go back to the beginning of this. Here's where we started the process. 151 keepers, 59 waivers, 46 retires. And you see the numbers that aren't 40202. That's wrong. That's wrong. That's wrong. You see, these are all the teams. And so that's before, and then this is after. And the math adds up right. Everybody is 40202. And if you add up all the years of the players, which here's a year number, and then this is year number times the value, which gets this number. This sort of reconciles that, because I'm inputting my numbers manually. This does a mathematical check for me. And you see negative 1600 is what you get when you take this minus that and that, 1600. And so everything reconciled at 402 and 2. So once this sheet is done, the next step is to get an alphabetic sort of the whole 9 yards. It's basically the same spreadsheet here, but all the blank spaces and the formats you see that you don't need, all this extra junk, you don't need it anymore. You do a sort of those $10,000 keepers, and when you do that, you're just really looking at this piece of information, this piece of information, that piece of information. And then when you do that, you have your 128 keepers. That's 4 per 32 teams. Then the next column, the yellow column, and I've color coded this. Again, 2 players per team are on waivers, 64, 128 to 192. There's 192. Same thing for retires, 2 of them. 2 times 64 makes 256 as $1 players. And that's it. And the rest of the guys are already in the league as carry-on guys, I call them. And there's 12 per team. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 times 32 is 384 plus 256, alphabetically, is 640, with Toronto the last alphabetical team. So now we know how to reclassify all the players who were in the league last year. We got our 384 carry-on guys in the greenish color, and we can do an evaluation of all the carry-on guys. We got 128 of your keepers. We got 64 guys on waivers for each team. And we got 64 guys who have been retired, but that doesn't necessarily mean their career is over. And the next step to this is to assemble all the cards in all 4 years, which is a total of 2,560 players, which will come in a future video. So that's where we're at in the Fall League of 1979 and 1982. Thanks for checking this out. We'll see you next time.